Hello, boys and girls. This is Mrs. Nice, and I'm going to be teaching you math online. I'm so excited to be teaching you math. I wanted to, first, before we get started, I wanted you to grab some materials for me. First, in the book bag that we gave you, there's an orange folder, and it says Math Resources there. So I want you to grab this. I'm going to ask you to grab a couple things, and I'm going to ask you to hit pause. So, your math folder. And then I would like you to grab a Post-it note and a pencil. So if you need mom or dad or grandma or whoever is there with you to help you, go get those things, hit pause, and then come back and see me. Okay, you're back, boys and girls. So I wanted again to introduce myself. I'm Mrs. Nice, and I was at the classroom across the hall from Miss Solomon. Some of you had Miss Solomon last year, and I was talking to those teachers, those first grade teachers from last year, Miss Solomon, Miss Grossman, Mrs. Wilson, and they were telling me that you guys were really good mathematicians. And I thought, wow, that's a big word. I wonder if they remember that word. So tell me, friends, what is a mathematician? Do you remember? Well, I found this cool chart that can help us go over what a mathematician is. Okay, so a mathematician is someone who uses their imagination. Sometimes you have to think of different ways to put numbers together, different patterns. So you might need to use your imagination. A mathematician is someone who explains their answers. How did you find the answer to that problem? We want to know. A mathematician is someone who looks for patterns. There could be all sorts of patterns in math. Patterns are things that go together. Maybe you might have an even or an odd number, an even or an odd. So that could be a pattern just like that, even, odd, and we'll talk more about that when we get into our lessons. Estimates, you kind of think about what's going to happen. Is this close to the answer that I'm going to get? That's an estimate. Explorers. So mathematicians, they explore with numbers. They do a really good job. They also make predictions. Again, what can happen with these numbers? I think this answer is this. I'm not sure though. I'm going to check it out. Shares ideas. We like to share with each other because that's how we learn. We learn from each other. And ask questions. You don't always know the answers to the questions, and if you have a problem, you need to ask us, or maybe a friend. Mathematicians solve problems all day long. That's what we do in math. We solve our problems, and we experiment. We find different ways to solve our problems. So a mathematician is someone just like you. Okay, so mathematicians, I asked you to grab materials, and I will ask you to do that at the beginning of every lesson. Okay, so next thing I want to talk to you about is this fun little chart that I have here. Okay. All right, so here, this is called a tens frame. I don't know if you remember this from first grade, but it's called a tens frame because there are 10 squares in this whole frame here. I'm going to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's our tens frame. So I have these little circles here. We call them counters. You might have remembered them from last year. They were yellow on one side and red on the other side. Now I'm going to place each one of these counters into a square, and then we're going to count them up. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I have 8 counters. Now, if I have 8 counters and I have this tens frame here, which tells me there's 10 squares, could I maybe write an equation here? Let's see. If I have 10 squares and I have 8 counters, I'm going to subtract, right? Subtract means taken away. So how do I know what my answer is? What do you think, friends? Well, if you notice, I have 2 spots left. So that would tell me that all of this whole 10 frame, I have 10 squares. I have 8 squares that are filled up and I have 2 left. That 10 minus 8 equals 2. Now I can do that another way too. Let's now we can see how many squares have counters and how many don't, and we can do an equation that way. Okay, let's count my counters again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so these guys have counters. These 2 don't. Plus, if I add them up, what do you think my answer, that's a plus sign, friends, will be? If I know my whole frame is 10 and I have 8 counters in squares, and I have 2 without counters, 2 squares without counters, guess what? That is 10. That is 10. So that was a little bit of a practice with a tens frame today. So the next thing I want you to do is to grab your orange folder. We're going to look at some of the materials you have in your orange folder here. Now on the top, I have a couple papers here that we're not going to look at right now. This math tools and resources. You don't need that right now, so I'm going to ask you to put this paper aside. Okay. And this was the page right after that. It's about bar diagrams. You can ask mom or dad, grandmom, whoever is there with you to look this over later. And then this page here, this has a game on one side and another activity on the other side. I don't need this paper right now either, so I'm going to ask you to put that aside. Now, in the back of your folder, I'm going to see these. These are your workbook pages. Okay, these are your workbook pages. This here is topic 1. This here is topic 3. Okay, we don't need these right now because I'm not doing a full lesson with you right now. But for our first math lesson, we will need topic 1. But I'm going to ask you to put these guys aside too. Then you have a few more papers left. Now you have this chart here. This is like a sleeve here that we have some number lines on. These are open number lines. We're going to use these later. This here is a bar diagram. Okay, and this is something we're going to use later. So when I ask you to pull one of these, you can write right on this with a whiteboard marker. Very cool. Okay, put that aside. So this is a double tens frame mat. So I showed you the tens frame. Okay, that's one tens frame. Double means 2. So there's 2 tens frames on here. Okay, that's what that is. Put that aside. Now I'm sure you remember this guy. I think maybe you used this in first grade. A hundreds chart. Okay, this shows you all of your numbers from 1 to 100. Okay, that's your hundreds chart. And the last page is our place value mat. Okay, this is tens and this is ones. So we might use all of these materials in our math lessons, and that's what I'm going to tell you in the beginning of the lesson. This is what I want you to grab. Okay, so put everything back in that folder, nice and neatly. Okay, and then put this away in a good location. the last thing I want to talk to you about today is our learning this year. So now that we're not first graders anymore, we're second graders, I want you to think about what would you like to learn in math in second grade? So I want you to think, what would you like to learn about in math? And now I want you to take your Post-it and your pencil or your pen or whatever you have with you. I want you to write that down. Think about what would you like to learn in math this year? Okay, so I want you to write that down and I want you to save this because when you meet your teacher in a small group, we're going to talk about what you would like to learn in math this year. I'm so happy to bring you your first lesson and you're going to be wonderful mathematicians. Remember, we keep our materials organized. You get what I ask you to in the beginning and you follow along with listening ears and listening eyes. Okay, mathematicians, I will see you next time. Have a wonderful first day of school.